take it away.
Ben, we are going to tag team. Could I ask you to push the slides, please?
We could. Rex, do you have them to hand?
Yeah, it's just I didn't have them queued up, so you'll have to give me a minute to get them ready.
Certainly. And I'll just chat while you do that, Rex. Thank you, Tom, for pointing out that it's always a British aim to fight to the last Canadian and Australian. So just want to remind everybody about that. I found this a very interesting panel when I read the intro to it. It could go anywhere, and it has so far. And we are taking a completely different angle, which we hope will interest some people. I will remind you that I put up in the chat that we have sponsored 4 so far. We have 1 more to go. Senior leader wargaming courses, 6 hours in length, that are available right now to anybody. The next one will be held on the 2nd of March from 6 o'clock in the morning till noon Eastern time, US Eastern time, so Ontario time. It's a great course. It's taught by Ed McGrady, Tom Mowat, and Peter Perla. So if you want to get in on it, just shoot me an email. It's in the chat, but it's buck@act.nato.int. Happy to let you in on the course.
I'm still looking for these. Wayne, do you remember who sent them to whom?
I sent them to you and Ben.
Okay.
And as I say, it's no problem for you to get in on it. There's no registration required. I'll just send you the Zoom link. It's not a design course. It's much more for senior leaders about resources required, about results they may expect, about terminology, that sort of thing. But it's also helpful for the staff level to understand what it is that their bosses need to know about wargaming so that they can better prepare them in terms of resources that they need, like money, human resources, and so on. Are we there yet? Are we coming close?
We will have them in a few seconds.
All right, then I'll start talking. So good afternoon. As I was introduced by Ben, I'm Wayne Buck. I'm a NATO international civilian working at NATO's Allied Command Transformation Headquarters here in Norfolk, Virginia, since 2001. Thank you, sir. I was in Canadian Army for 29 years. And since then, I've been down here, first 4 years in uniform, then after that as a civilian. By the way, it doesn't snow here very often, just so you Canadians know. I work as a modeling simulation subject matter expert within the Joint Force Development Directorate, and I'm joined today by Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Beam, who works in the Operational Experimentation Branch of the same directorate. We truly do appreciate the opportunity to share our work with this wargaming community today. We're still in the early days of our development, but fully recognize the importance of aligning our work with nations and making the best use of the wealth of knowledge and experience that exists in the defense, commercial, and academic sectors, especially the knowledge that exists in the Connection series. And I've attended several, UK, North, US, and so on. In this photo here, you'll see what I think is the worst of wargaming, and that is observer days or distinguished visitor days. And that's what you see going on in this one, which is a war game that I held in 2018, where we had many observers come on one day to see us. We're going to take a slightly different angle on this. Next, please. and tell you that within NATO, wargaming is exploding. It's truly exploding. For some time, we've done small war games and even occasionally a medium-sized one. But recently, we've been receiving demand signals from our NATO leadership and operational comrades that they want more. The operational leadership is insisting that they try out their plan via war games and not just course of action activities. So they want real analytical war games, which is great for us because we think that it adds fruit to the basket. Next. Our agenda is simple. What we're doing, and then what I call inside the box and outside the box. And I'll explain that in a moment. But first, Aaron's going to talk to you about what types of war games we do, and you will have all seen this slide before, and what purposes we have as well. Aaron? I don't hear an Aaron. Next slide, please. All right. Aaron may not be able to get on. So you've all seen the types, ranging everywhere from seminar war games, which are really bog sets, right across to the technological war games that involve simulations and so on. Strategy development, operational planning, analytical studies. We really focus on the concept development, analytical studies, and education and training in what we do. Next, please. Did you miss one? Should be another one in there. Okay. No, up. Okay. There should have been one in there called sample audacious wargaming activities, and I'll just talk about that now. Back up, please. So inside the box, to me, is really what goes on. You sure there's not one before that?
No, that's it. It goes.
Okay.
That one.
Okay. So sample audacious wargaming activities. In the last 3 years or so, we've done anti-access area denial study war games, which took a couple of years to do. We've done dual capable aircraft studies with war games. Dual capable aircraft are those aircraft that we have in NATO, thus in the nations, that are capable of carrying conventional and nuclear weapons. We've done SACEUR's area of operations wide strategic war games. We've done 360-degree offense defense studies for the broader Russian missile challenge. We've done prototype synthetic environment supporting disruptive technology games. We've done comprehensive defense seminar war games. We've done audacious wargaming at the Modeling and Simulation Center of Excellence. So it's really spreading out, the whole idea. Now, when I talk about inside and outside the box, what I really mean is that Rex and Peter and Una and others have taught us particular design processes. That's what I think about as inside the box. Those are fairly straightforward. And here I use the UK MOD Warfighting Handbook, which several people who are online now have had a hand in producing. An excellent text, no doubt about it. NATO will probably steal it and change it, put our name on it at some point in the future. But it's processes. What it doesn't tell you is what's outside the box. So all of those things that really affect the war game, but not the processes. So NATO has its BIS C-75, BIS Strategic Command 75 series, which works well for the purpose of exercises. It'll probably be adapted to wargaming as well. But outside those are elements that are a bit more difficult to address. Wargaming really in NATO is still in the Wild West. Yeah, nations, some nations have their own doctrine, but there's no multinational doctrine per se yet. And if you know about it, please let me know. Some people such as Murray, Sue Collins, along with the Audacious Wargaming Tiger team, are trying to address this, but we still have a way to go. Next. So inside the box, NATO expects troops to be trained. So when NATO gets troops from nations, we don't expect to have to train them at the tactical level. So there's no real tactical level war games. We work at the upper operational level and political strategic military level. So your ambassador level, your 3 or 4 star military level, the level that your capitals work at, the level that Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe works at, that's where we are. Joint Force Commands, yes, they are at the upper operational level. So for example, for Afghanistan, Joint Force Command Brunsum took care of that and led that. But that's the sort of level that we work at. Generally, we play forces based on capability. And I noticed that in the introduction to this panel, it talked about interoperability and weapon systems and so on. When we think about forces, we don't think necessarily about weapon systems. We think about capability, because we don't know what nations will bring to the fight. Okay, so it's capability. What can a weapon system do? What can a weapon system do? What can a unit do? What can a maneuver unit do? If it's a tank division, what is it capable of? Not how many tanks, of what caliber, how fast can they drive? It's much more about capability instead of exact specifications. So for example, the NATO Response Force. NATO Response Force, it's a yearly role for some nation or nations to be involved with. And we don't really get a say in that as long as they can respond to the capability that's required. As far as red and blue is concerned, red is fairly straightforward. We have a recognized intelligence picture, which is something that the nations, all 30 of them, not 29, but all 30 of them agree on and say, yeah, okay, that's what we recognize as being the intelligence picture. That is what the opponent looks like, the possible opponent looks like. But for blue information, it's extremely difficult to get. Some of it is because they don't want to share. And some of it is because contractually they cannot share. So one of our studies that we were doing a war game on, we sent out 2 notices to nations asking for blue information. We got one response back from one country saying contractually we are not allowed to share that information with you, which is really unfortunate, but that's what we live with in a coalition. If you want really good information, you may not get it. But do you really need that? Or do you need Jane's information? And that's what you got to figure out a little bit in your war game. Next, please. That was inside the box. Outside the box are some things that we deal with all the time. And quite frankly, these are harder issues. Inside the box, it deals very much like exercises. Outside the box, we're talking about scale, and scale is multidimensional. It's the number of nations that are involved. It's the number of people that are involved. It's the number of locations that are involved. It's the number of, pick a topic. The scale is different every time. Terminology, you would think, oh, well, you have allied administrative publications like AAP6 or whatever it happens to be that talks about terminology, so everybody uses the same one. Not true. Let me give you an example. We did a war game 2018, I guess, just after Afghanistan, and we had a number of military participants, and these military participants had been through staff college in their nations in the previous few years. At the time, well, thank you very much, Rex. I got your note. At the time, the staff colleges were not teaching warfighting. They were teaching crisis response. So they used crisis response terminology and not warfighting terminology. But when we had our war game, we, the leaders in the war game, spoke warfighting terminology, and the participants didn't understand us. Okay, so there's things that you have to realize about that. Doctrine, yes, we have a NATO doctrine, but it's not the same everywhere. Doctrine's not interpreted by nations unilaterally. I have a question. Does your scale include size of units? In NATO, we only deal down to the core level. So everything below core is based on the nation. So division and below is based on nation. Doctrine, interoperability. Yeah, interoperability is fairly good. We have STANEGs, we have STANRECs, standardization agreements and requirements and so on that work really well. Realism, red line versus blue line. I'll go back to an earlier discussion that was out there. With 30 nations, some of them extremely close to an opponent's border, some of them on the opponent's border. They do not want the opponent, the possible opponent, to be riled. So we do not use real political and typically not real geographical data. Certainly not in non-classified settings. Next. Yeah, so what's the purpose? Is it analytical? Is it training? Is it education? Is it getting people to know what their job is? I'm mostly involved with the analytical, but our Joint Warfare Center, who works for us, who works for Headquarters Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, deals with training, education, and exercises. They use it for a different purpose. Security classification is really important. We can bring all of the allies in, but we can't bring partners in, typically. Availability of facilities is very, very important. Even though we are all the same in NATO, our communication systems still don't talk together the way they should. We still don't have access to everything we should. So availability of facilities is really important. Probably much better in a national context. Funding, the NATO command structure operates off of a certain pool of money put in together by the nations, and the NATO force structure works off a different pool of money. And sometimes it's very difficult to make them match up. Planning timelines are not very well understood by our leadership and by our comrades. So they don't understand that just because they ask for a war game to be held in 2 months, that you can pull it all together. It's difficult to make them understand what the timelines are. And of course, because we work on usually the NATO secret network, the availability of wargaming tools is pretty much not existent. We work off of Microsoft Office, typically PowerPoint, email, and so on. Sorry, I tried to go through that pretty quick, but I will take any questions that you have. Rex, the last slide is give us a call.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. It's again another interesting take on it, looking at the way NATO as itself a coalition alliance sort of organization has to